So we've pretty much wrapped up the typical E3 week in June, where like the first half or so we'd have that like 5-day span of just nonstop announcements. And we technically had that kind of this past week. I mean, there were a lot of things that went on with different live stream shows, game announcements, but as I'm looking back on this, and I have had this discussion with many people, most recently even on the Click R3 podcast with Ryan, around the idea of people missing E3. And, as I've been kind of thinking about this and looking back over this week of announcements, it does feel like we're missing something. And yeah, it might legitimately be E3. So I wanted to get a bit of a temperature check here to see how everyone's feeling. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure to hit the like button. And subscribe if you're new. Now, if we do take a look at I guess is it just called Summer Game Fest now? Like just this time period. That's the other thing. We don't really know what to call it. And the reason I can tell people are still kind of missing E3 at this point is because they call it E3 or just not E3 time, because we're still kind of just lost out in the void. Like, what do we call this block of gaming presentations in June? And I guess Jeff Keighley has come in with the title Summer Game Fest, and that's sort of what people are latching onto it with. But like the schedule here that was made up by Polygon, we can see Guerrilla Collective, the Summer Game Fest is in there, Devolver Direct, the Future of Play Direct, there's a Future Game Show, Xbox Game Showcase that I think most of us look back on now as being the show of pretty much the E3, not E3 week. And as I'm kind of looking back on these different shows here, it does feel like, I don't want to say it's light, but it doesn't have that same feeling that we've had in the past around this time. But it did still kind of have that feeling of maybe the ramp up to it. So we had Sony do their State of Play, and didn't go over as well as people were hoping going into that, thinking it'd be a big showcase because, one, it's been a little while since Sony's really had a big blowout showcase that had people really excited and looking towards what they're bringing up. But also, it's around this time. We're ramping up into the early part of the summer, and we know that's typically the time where the gaming world, the industry, will converge, and we'll have all kinds of stuff happening in that first half of June. So naturally, we start thinking showcase, and we got a State of Play. It had Astrobot, which is really cool, but it also had Concord, and people are still ripping that thing apart online now. But again, Xbox has pretty much remained steady, I feel like, this whole way with their shows. Not everyone is as good as this year, obviously, but they've been there at their own convention hall, really, to hold these different showcases. And Jeff Keighley has been trying to take up the mantle of E3 really ever since E3 started to struggle there in like 2019 or so. 2020 is when they canceled outright, and then it was pretty much over after that. But as I'm looking back at E3, which I did, I went back through the years and checked. I mean, the last one we had a full E3 was 2018. What I mean by full is all three of the major platform holders participated: Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo. See, after 2018, Sony decided not to go to E3 at all anymore. And I don't just mean they didn't hold a presentation. They just stopped going in general. Like, remember in 2018, they had that weird setup where they went between tents or something. And, I mean, they showed off The Last of Us Part 2, which had a good showing. They had Ghost of Tsushima, also had a good showing. But they had these weird performances between them, and apparently the crowds, people had to go between buildings, and it was just a very awkward setup to then just run trailers on a big screen. So it seemed like after that, Sony went, what are we even doing here? And just stopped. So, I mean, after that, we started seeing less and less interest in the idea of E3, mostly because of cost and all the logistics that go into making it happen, and of course, having development timelines line up with it. If you go all the way back to when E3 first started in like the mid-90s, development times are a fraction of what they are now, so it was a bit easier to have something ready every single summer, consistently for E3. That's just becoming less and less possible now. And then you also factor in how much money it costs to go to E3 as one of these companies, millions of dollars. Yeah, you have companies who at times, let's face it, they would show up and be like, why did you do a presentation at all? Maybe they felt the necessity to do so because they're part of the ESA, or they just want gamers in general to remember that they exist. But even beyond that part, on E3 side with the ESA, it kind of started falling apart when they tried to commercialize it, as in when they tried to sell thousands of tickets to fans to make it some sort of attraction and event, when it was originally conceived to be a trade show to allow developers, publishers, all these people to get together, vendors, just come together and be able to talk off the record, sure, in different meeting rooms and stuff where it's not recorded through email, and we spur of the moment things happen at these events, and it's been recorded many, many times. This is how some of the weirdest collaborations would start, is just walking down a hall, catching somebody, just, hey, let me talk to you about this, and then you kind of make that elevator pitch, and they like it, and you go from there. That's kind of the idea, right? That sort of that baseline of why you have a trade show, not necessarily to sell tickets and try to extract more money from gamers who want to go to E3 because it's viewed as some incredible experience. In fact, most of the people that I talked to that went to E3 when they were selling tickets, their experience mostly was them waiting in line for hours and hours and hours to play about 30 minutes of a game. And I'll admit, it's kind of sad when you go to like the Wikipedia page for E3 and it doesn't say E3 is an annual trade event for the video game industry. It says E3 was an annual trade event for the video game industry, and it's like, whew, that's that hits it does put things into perspective there a bit, because again, we have to go back to 2018 and it's 2024 right now, so we have to go back 6 years to get to what most of us remember E3 to be like, where there were live stage events and massive like booths and stuff set up. Because even if Nintendo's not there, as they of course moved to a direct presence as opposed to having stage presence, they still had massive booths. Like 2018, they had an entire like show floor all done up for Super Smash Brothers. They were showing it off that year, and it was super impressive looking. Or you go back and they like a whole Mario themed thing for Mario Odyssey. So they were there in force every single year, even if they weren't setting up an entire live presentation. And that's the other thing about it. The part that we all remember with E3 were these live stage presentations, the good and the bad. Sure, there were some really rough presentations that happened, whether it's Kaz Hirai dropping the PSP on stage, or Wii Music being shown off, or there were puppets at one point for Nintendo, or the giant enemy crab, or Connect and TV. But those are all things that we remember and look back on as entertainment, but just very memorable moments. And these are all things that really were spurred on by E3 and that human element that is seemingly gone now. I mean, I don't mind a presentation where it really is just trailer, and like a person here and there, because we are tuning in for the games. I understand that, but there is just something that feels like it's missing with how things are set up now in June. And really the unfortunate part now is I don't think there's any avenue for E3 to ever return. I think it is absolutely gone for good. Even 10 years from now, they could have conversations about bringing it back, but I feel like currently publishers are pretty comfortable with just doing live streams. I mean, it's very easy to reach out and just get your message to gamers and potential customers through social media and YouTube and Twitch and stuff, where you just hit a button and you can live stream, and it's very controlled, and you may have already pre-recorded your presentation, so you don't have to stand up on stage and hope that the teleprompter doesn't freeze up, and then you're left with some very awkward exchanges on stage. And, maybe some of this is just me with like nostalgia talking, since going back even to the early 2000s when we first started having what was live access at the time to E3, because before that you would find out about stuff at E3 like the following month in magazines, or sometimes people would post on forums online, but it was not like it is now where information is immediate. And even then, when it started to show up on G4 TV, where there was live coverage on TV, it was incredible stuff back then. This is like what, 2002 or 2003, somewhere in there. And they would have an entire day of E3. So it would be constant coverage of video games. And trust me, back then, that was mind-blowing stuff. And it was in the first half of June, so we had just gotten out of school, right? Summer break was on, and E3 would start happening right away. So yes, for me, from the consumer perspective, yeah, I do miss E3, and part of that is me thinking back to that time period, but also the spectacle of the whole thing, everyone coming together, knowing when stuff is going to happen, and people can get kind of prepared for it. Because if you look at things currently, Sony went in May with a state of play that was, right, we'll say. Microsoft did show up in force in their typical time frame. And then Nintendo is going to happen, their direct, I don't know, in the next 2 weeks or so. There doesn't really seem to be much urgency at all from these different companies. And I guess that's something that E3 at least brought, is these companies would show up with something in that week. And at times they would probably move stuff up and show it too early, but at least have something ready to go for that time period, because all eyes were on video games in that week. And now it's just so spread out, scattershot, and just all over the place. It's really hard to tell when anything's going to be happening, and having all the attention kind of spread out, I don't know, just maybe dilutes it. It's kind of hard to describe, and that's what I mean. It feels like we're missing something without E3. But let me know what you guys think about this down below. I am very curious if any of you are missing E3, or maybe looking back on the old days of having this big trade show and some of the excitement that would take place throughout that entire week. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.